It's funny because when we were, every once in a while, like the Wyoming State House will do like an introduction to new business in town, and they would just do, round of applause for Joe Wang from Tacen. All right, made up.
So we're here with Jay from Tacen.
Yeah.
You've been actually an Urbit supporter for a bit.
Oh, wow.
A while, and he's the mind behind the ReAssembly conference, unconference. You've done it, I think, twice now, right?
Yes.
And it's like, it's a event that has become kind of like, I feel like a part of the community, like it's a part of the calendar, the community calendar.
Yep.
Let's say.
Yep.
And that's been really great. It's kind of become a place where a lot of the core dev discussions happen, which is very cool.
Yeah.
So I was wondering kind of if you could walk us through how you got into Urbit, and what brought you into the community, because your company's not an Urbit company, right? It's just sort of you guys are fans of Urbit or sort of like allies of
Oh, yeah. I would say Urbit adjacent for now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So when I first heard about Urbit was around when the Strange Loop, disinvite thing happened. I forget exactly what year. I think it was 2015.
Yeah.
And, I got into it. I read some blogs by longtime Urbit supporters, Andrea being one of them. I forgot her last name, forgive me. And there was a really interesting blog by this horse guy.
A horse?
I mean, like
a horse avatar?
Yeah, horse avatar.
Right.
And then said something about, here's how Martian computing works. Then laid out some of the central tenets of Urbit, like deterministic computing, idempotent messaging, and all that stuff. And I'm reading this and that's what I want from any software that I write or I use, right?
Yeah.
And then I kind of forgot about the strange loop thing, and I just just immerse myself in reading the solid state, interpreter paper. And then I, sent the email and got a planet through email. And
I always tell people back in the day, it was like you had to, so if I remember correctly, you were in the chat.
Yep.
And then I think if you chatted, Galen told me once, but if you sent a certain number of messages, essentially, it would say, put a little prompt and it'd say, if you want a planet, send an email. And it was just literally just Galen responding to the email.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, what a way to onboard. I mean, that was great. And I got the first planet and I was messing around. And I hosted my first Urbit group, which was, nobody was there, but it's okay. I was having fun. It was about trains. And
oh, really?
Yeah, it was a
train group.
Yeah, train group. And so I had a lot of fun. And then so I went to LambdaConf and learned more about from Curtis's speech about just solid state interpreter. And then after that, just got more and more involved. Got into the early crowdfunding. And then just went from there. Got my start, ran it, and then I host a bunch of planets now. Yeah. And at one point, I think it was sometime around when Twitter started mass banning people. Mm-hmm. I ran this program where I would just give planet to anybody who wanted it. Yeah. And then I think I onboarded 20 people or something like that.
Yeah. Which was a fifth of the network at the time.
Not that many, but it was a lot of fun because I felt like I was actually doing something and people enjoyed it. And when I started my company, hired actually 3 people out of Urbit directly because I knew they knew what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to interview heavily on the technical side or anything like that. And I just said, hey, when can you start? That day. So actually one of my colleagues started the same day I interviewed him. So it was great. Early day, and I'm sure even now, the quality of people on Urbit is very high, right? Yeah. Even now. So,
I mean, that's a good point, because it's kind of, people don't think about Urbit as a LinkedIn killer, but it is in fact. I mean,
it's
I don't hire anybody that I don't know off of Urbit. I mean, I don't really need to.
Yeah.
And the good thing is you have the technical, they can turn a computer on, et cetera. But you also have usually have dealt with them in groups. You kind of know a little bit, even if you don't know them personally, you know them about what they're about a little bit. And I feel like one thing I like is that, yeah, you feel like within Urbit there is a kind of reputation, even if we don't have a technical reputation system, there is like a word of mouth reputation. Like people don't really want to burn that, so you don't have the feeling that someone's going to like rug you necessarily, which is a really, really cool thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's I don't mean to sound cheesy, but it's like camaraderie exists for sure in Urbit. Like any group that you go to, there's willingness for people to like help others who are having trouble with whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And I think it goes beyond just like creating another social network, because a lot of people just dismiss it as, oh, another social network. Like, well, there's a programming language, and then there's the interpreter, and then there's the all that stuff. So I always try to focus on the deterministic computing part.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, just a social network, and that's the thing. I think people, that's not just something, right?
That's
it's
right.
Like the people who run the United States of America are a social network.
That's right. I mean, it's like what if you try to do everything what internet is capable of doing in short time, a relatively short period of time. People always say, oh, 10 years, but like, come on, man. Internet took a very long time to come up to where it is now. So.
Yeah. And I think you're right, that social networking aspect, not even in the technical sense of like a Facebook or a Twitter, but just like the fact that there is this like social group that is connected by digital, networking. That is a fundamental characteristic of the internet.
Yeah, it's the network state before there was even a concept of network state. Because people started saying, hey, what if we actually just, had chapter houses everywhere and met, that's like basically half of the network state. Right? So absolutely. It's great.
That's good. So and then during that time you were not working on Tacen, you were working on something else. And so when you came to start, explain what Tacen actually, so it's staffed by Urbit people, or some Urbit people, but what is Tacen?
Yeah, so I was working at, big, huge internet company that did infrastructure and, Samsung, I'll just say it's Samsung. And then I realized, wow, they route through an enormous amount of data through their, guts just to get something, like lights turned on. And I, thought more, ruminated more on that, since it's going through a gut. And then after that, I worked for a crypto company that did a lot of payment processing. So it's the same deal, right? A lot of messages going through, that's my own, but it's going through someone else's infrastructure. Why don't we have something that, you don't have a lot of intermediaries in the middle, cut the cost, reduce the length of travel of data and all that stuff. And after I was a director of engineering at a crypto company called Metallicus that made, mobile payment app. And then when I was done with it, I was on a flight back from France. It was a wedding that I went to. And then I started typing, geez, what kind of exchange would I want to trade in, right? Well, first, it's got to be non-custodial. And second, it's got to be fast. And then third, it's got to be cross-chain. So up to that point, like Uniswap was, and still is not cross-chain. It can only do things in Ethereum, and it's not fast. And it's non-custodial, but like there are a lot of exchanges that do 2 out of 3 very well, but not all 3. So I was thinking about that for a while, and then wrote down a bunch of things. And then, while I was working, Bitcoin went down to 3,500. and it was the worst time to quit because that's after I quit. So I had to sell a lot of stuff at like $4,000 or $5,000. Took my retirement fund out, paid the government to whatever exit tax, and just kept on building and hired a few people, and that was 4 years ago. So now it feels like, what did I go through? I have no idea. But what do we have now is a extremely fast version of a DEX. So you don't have custody. We don't have custody. And it's open source, open architecture. So imagine, if you will, if you had a Visa payment network, except Visa payment network was open, preserved privacy, and you know exactly what the procedures are and API is, so you can build on top of it. So that's what we built, which is open settlement network, and then we built a exchange on top of it to prove the case it works.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. So the exchange is kind of like what people would show up for.
That's right. That's right. If you will permit my very poor analogy, it's like the settlement network is Urbit, and then the exchange is the app on top.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. That's good. That's really, really interesting. And so, I mean, can you briefly explain to me how you do?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, to make it really simple because I'm not super.
Oh no, it's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more simpler than it sounds. And so how it works is, in each of the cryptocurrency networks, we deploy what's called the asset custody contract.
Okay.
And that's open source. Everybody can audit it and look at what's in there. The asset custody contract is the one that collateralizes your own trade on a off-chain venue. Because like, imagine if you just said, here's my wallet balance, and then I'm gonna put money onto the off-chain venue, right? Yeah. Because then like you can't do that because you can just move the money out. So it has to be put into a place where it can be immobilized until, or stuck there until like you call a function to settle. Mm-hmm. So very similar to Lightning Network, which is also where I got the inspiration from. So in Lightning Network, you send Bitcoin to a Bitcoin wallet address, and then that gets recognized by Lightning Network node, but it's immobile until you want it out. So once it's recognized, then it's cleared for trading on an off-chain venue, like an exchange. But the positive side of that is that then the exchange can work its magic and being fast where it needs to be, which is centralized order book, central limit order book, CLOB. So the DEXs work in a way where they have either a specific quotes that are out, or they have a standing order of liquidity pool, right? So which means that it's one or the other, and no one's happy because there's impermanent loss in whatever, right? But in the real order book, it can be modified, added, changed, canceled in a split of a second. Interesting. Probably, two tenths of a millisecond.
Wow.
So which means that adding and canceling orders is integral part in price setting behavior in a normal, fully functioning market, right? Yeah. So that's what this settlement network, separating the settlement network enables. Now, the asset custody is done, and then exchange recognizes it, traders can trade, but the traders are also signing their orders so that we know it's from Alice or Bob or whatever. Yeah. So it's buyer's signature, seller's signature, and then when they get matched, exchange signs it and then emits. And then that emitted trades are recorded by validators, much in the same way, say, like Ethereum validators record transaction, right? And then finally, when, say, Alice says, hey, I bought, Matic on Polygon using, ETH on Ethereum. I want the Polygon, right? Matic, right? Then she would call the function on Polygon and then on chain rather than exchange doing anything, and then get the money out.
Interesting.
The beauty of that is, imagine if, like, for whatever reason, exchange is DDoSed, right? Yeah. Doesn't matter because you can still get your money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think that there's so much of kind of like quote unquote Urbit culture that is, for a long time was just separate from crypto. Yeah. It like just didn't even really, it was kind of funny because I think there was a lot of, it wasn't even like opposition. It was just like, we're just working on our thing. It happens to be about distributed this and decentralized that, whatever. But it was kind of like there was very little overlap. Yeah. And it's funny because I actually was very much involved in migrating the address space onto Ethereum. So I remember the first time we were like, doing that.
Everybody was upset. You remember?
I remember that. I very much do. And I had to deal with it.
But it turned out to be a good
no, decision. I think it was a genius decision. I mean, genius might be an overstatement, but it was a very good decision.
It was a great decision.
Yeah. And I think that so what's interesting is that you see how these things have come together quite a bit. I mean, like the just general crypto, all this stuff, and Urbit. And I think it's interesting because in some ways we're not, I guess prejudiced, because a lot of people who are in the space are really, they're committed. They have a lot of skin in the game and in a particular thing. They're path dependent on this thing or that thing. And so you have a lot of kind of like bad, I mean, I would say bad, I think, no, actually I would say bad faith discussions where it's sort of like, well, my bags are here, ergo my thing is good, you know? And so it's kind of interesting to be sort of from the outside because you can be a little bit more, you know, you can see both sides a little bit.
Right. I mean, I think like important thing to take away is that just taking this like, you know, again, like a silly, you know, word, but urban mindset, right?
Yeah.
If you think about, okay, how do I maximize privacy? How do I decentralize them as much as possible? Then things will follow. I mean, good things get built.
Yeah,
I think that's the way I look at it. And even though my own technology is not built on it, a lot of the inspiration is from how Urbit's put together.
Yeah.
Like what are they doing?
And the discussions probably you've had on, you know, with the group of people.
Absolutely,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it's a funny thing because I think that phenomenon where you have people that are very path dependent on what the solution has to be to a problem, which I think which arises out of financialization, right? It's sort of like it actually hurts. Like, because it forecloses a whole bunch of options, right? If someone's like, hey, there's this problem, and I know Bitcoin has to be the answer. It's like, it may not actually be, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe like the Urbit mindset is a little bit more kind of like able to explore it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's like, again, like going back to the root of the internet, which is decentralized and all that stuff, which unfortunately took a different path in the actual history. But, you know, like, keeping that mindset helped me quite a bit, and then just like, okay, what would
Urbit do?
Yeah, what would Urbit do? What would Philip do? What would everyone else do? You know,
that's really cool. And so, as a result of all this, he is not a lawyer, just to be clear.
I'm not.
He's not a lawyer. But I've heard a joke several times. They're like, "Oh, well, Jay's turned himself into a lawyer because Jay knows every regulation around these digital assets one could know." So I was just wondering, could you give maybe the listeners a little bit, kind of like a TLDR. If you are a group based in the United States, you're involved in distributing, selling digital goods. Kind of what's the hits right now that someone has to know?
Yeah. So there's. I mean, it's. I originally was gonna give a talk about taxes, but I think I need to actually talk about the investors first. So there's a class of investors classification called accredited and qualified. So there are in U.S. You know, if you're selling unregistered securities to an accredited investor, then that's a big no-no, right? So you have to first know who you're selling it to, and then you can't do something called general advertisement or general solicitation. There are two different things. Where general solicitation is you're telling the public, hey, we're selling stock, or and here's where you can buy it. And general advertisement is, hey, we're selling the stock. So none of that is allowed, which means that if you're trying to sell tokens, then what do you do? Right? But there's a nice carve out for what's called Reg S, where if you are if you're selling only to overseas person and not a U.S. person, then you just have to make sure that Americans are prevented from buying tokens in some way, and just do a good faith way to prevent them from buying it. So then then you can still sell tokens overseas and be fine because it's a Reg S exempt.
So even if you are an American entity, you can sell the tokens to non-Americans.
That's right, absolutely.
Luckily, there are several non-Americans. There's plenty.
There are plenty of non-Americans, and also it's an interesting thing, right? Like when I first started this journey, like I was thinking, oh man, the prejudice, right? Like, is there going to be money? There's plenty of money out there. I can tell you that.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay. And in terms of the good faith effort, because if someone stacks 3 VPNs on each other, and it's like you can't really prevent someone from doing that.
That's right. It's I think the regulatory agencies are also aware that you're not omniscient. You're not NSA. You don't have but there are other things that they also ask, like for example, you still have to do KYC, because like you have to establish that they're not American, right? Which is like an opposite. It's like, okay, and then like you also then have different problems, like for example, FinCEN, which is Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. What they care about is preventing terror financing. So prohibited countries and prohibited persons that you're filtering away, and that you do good enough background checks so that you don't sell to people that could be connected to Iran or something like
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and then, but it's something that's eminently doable with some good preparations. And then, like things are obvious. Like when people are trying to scam you, like they'll do stuff like, I mean, this is not specific to ours, so I just have to be careful what I say. But people have told me that they'll do stuff like they'll submit, they'll get someone else to buy the token for them, right? Like for example, from like Indonesia. But then when you look at the purchaser's address, it's like in the middle of nowhere in the jungle or something. It's like those things are so obvious, and you can catch it relatively easily. And I think that's like when you do that, and when you have a history of like following through on those KYC checks, the regulators are generally fine with it. The big problem is when they sell to an American and then or advertise to an American.
Yeah. It seems like, I was going to say, the advertising itself seems like you're just painting a target on your back. Right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for
because
sure.
it's like, it's a thing that's meant to be shown to a lot of people. So you're just sort of like, I am flouting the law when you say that.
Yeah, it's nuts because, back in the day, if you're an American company selling stock to a British national, like let's say in 70s or whatever, it's fine if you advertise in British newspaper because the expectation is that no American is going to read British newspaper, right? But we live in internet age where, if we post anything on Twitter, even if it's intended for British, Americans will see it.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because it seems like, the way that you'd prevent it on a site that you own is kind of obvious, right? It's like you just do some stuff. But it's like doing it on third-party things where you're posting, we're a user-generated content site, basically. It's like, I'm posting something, and I don't know where people are going to read it from. How could I?
Right.
So is it just that you should just avoid all that altogether? Or?
There is a way to do it. And this is the same thing where, like, if you look at any of the startup founders, how they frame it, they'll say something like, they're working on XYZ, click here to learn more, right? And when you click it, it's a questionnaire that asks like, are you American?
That's
right?
really funny.
So you can kind of do that. And the thing is that like the exemptions that are allowed under the SEC, like these exemptions also take into account like you just can't sell it to like some rando, accredited investor. You had to have had prior relationship.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Which is kind of
interesting.
Which is kind of silly, right? Like how would I mean?
Why does it matter?
Yeah, what does it matter, right? If they're already wealthy, but apparently it matters. And then so then you have to be careful how you're establishing the relationship in the first place. So like you can't tell them, hey, like I'm selling something you want to buy. It has to be like, someone has to contact you and say, hey, like, what are you doing? Here's what I'm doing. And then the guy has to initiate and say, hey, I want to invest. Then you can, it's kind of weird song and dance we do. Like,
that's really, so I mean, so one thing that I was wondering though, is that, NFTs in one case, the NFT is in that it is non-fungible. It is different, at least it seems different categorically from a stock. Like it couldn't be confused for stock. And then also, I mean, the fact that it represents, it seems more akin to like art, like traditional art, or like collectibles, right? So I'm just wondering what's the difference between like a token, like an ERC20, and like Beanie Babies, for example.
Right.
Like, how would there be? So
it has to do with like the first party selling it at fixed price at the beginning. So that's like one of them. So if I sold a stock at some issuance price and then there's a secondary market that lets it float, then that's one thing, right? Then that's unregistered securities apparently. But if you if you sell something at a fixed price and say we make no claim that this is anything to do with the company, it has no like dividend like mechanism, it's not an investment vehicle because it's just like Beanie Baby, right? Then it's okay all of a sudden. So it's like
it's very interesting.
It's very weird because that people are buying these things to sell it on OpenSea.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting. I think about that because I just think about art, right? If I buy, there's some gallerist. I go to the gallery. First, I have this relationship with the gallerist. I go to the gallery. He says, there's this up and coming artist. He makes these beautiful hats. Would you like to buy a hat? I buy a hat. But part of what I'm doing is I am not trusting, I would say, but the labor for creating the market, for the managing the value of the thing, I'm implicitly trusting the gallerist to actually do that. So kind of in some ways, with the Howey test, like would fail the Howey test is actually I'm not doing. It's not like I'm doing anything to make this art more.
Yeah. So the answer to that is that when you buy anything that has like that's not an classified as investment vehicle, advertised as investment vehicle, that's important. Meaning like someone selling an art can't be like saying like it's going to appreciate in value, or there's going to be other act outside of just the art itself that's going to make it appreciate in value.
Yeah.
Then for sure it'll, people will say, that's a big no-no. But if it's like, it's a great art and then it's got some animation and I like it and then I buy it, right? Then it's much more, unlikely that it's going to be classified as a unregistered securities offering. And the problem is that a lot of times there are these NFT projects, like for example, Basie, they started off that way, but then they started doing things where they would chop off the NFT and give like tokens and things like that, right? That's when it starts to become like a lot more enforceable in the eyes of SEC.
Why did they do that? What's the
money?
But no, I appreciate that. Actually, what's the play there?
Right. So the play is they realize that the step function for it's the way I think about it is this. When you draw a graph on price versus demand, right? So it's usually like there's a demand curve where you go across and then that's the demand and that's the price, right? What they're trying to do is capture all of the area underneath the price demand by offering the high-end ones in the NFT and then Macy or whatever on the middle and then the token at the low end, right? Low price, high demand, right? So they're trying to capture the entire area under the demand curve. Which is pretty smart.
It's smart. It's interesting because it's also like it's why I tell people Maserati could probably do a minivan, but they wouldn't. It's like there are reasons that traditional companies don't do this because it's like dilutes the brand.
That's right.
Usually of the higher end stuff, you cannibalize the you get greedy, and the lower end stuff cannibalizes the brand, and then it brings
exactly. But at the same time. You probably have a holding company that holds luxury cars,
and that's the smart thing,
right, and then they separate out the brand that way, right?
Okay, well that's really and so how does this stuff that we've talked about here dovetail with? The Wyoming. You guys are based in Wyoming. Wyoming has this landmark DAO sort of legislation. Explain to me the relationship. Like, why is Wyoming a favorable jurisdiction and stuff like that?
Absolutely. So the Wyoming DAO law basically has why it's important is this. When you start a DAO anywhere else, they may classify that as a general partnership, which means that the DAO members now assume unlimited liability for anything that DAO does, which is tremendously disastrous, right? so let's not do that. So what Wyoming DAO law does is that if you file LLC formation with DAO that's linked, then the DAO is classified as an LLC.
Got it.
That then limits the liability of the members and all that stuff, which is again, it's just legal maneuvering, but it's important legal maneuvering. So that shows a degree of sophistication that the Wyoming lawmakers have, and that's why I think I'm definitely wearing this everywhere.
Pro Wyoming.
Yeah, pro Wyoming. You won't find a bigger Wyoming maximalist than anyone else, and. Going back to what else is Wyoming doing? So, one of the Wyoming senators is very big on crypto. Senator Lummis, she's everywhere in the, if you look for crypto and U.S. Senate, she'll pop up, right? And she's very crypto friendly. She's trying to chart a course where the crypto, capital formation can happen in the United States, which is a lot better than what you can say about everyone else. And finally, there are a series of laws that are passed, like for example, things that allow Speedy to form, and Speedy is a special depository institution. I forget the exact term, but it's basically Bitcoin Bank, right? So what that means is that you can deposit Bitcoin and then get banking access.
Interesting.
Right, which is very important for crypto business. And Wyoming also has this part of the banking law from a long time ago is what's called Wyoming outlaws rehypothecation. And what that means is that you know the answer. I know that when you see the smile, that means you're talking to an informed person. And what rehypothecation is when you take someone's deposit and then use it as a collateral for lending out more stuff.
Yeah.
So in Wyoming, that's prevented, which means if you deposit Bitcoin, that they're not allowed to lend that out, use that for collateral. So which means that your funds is going to be there.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot.
Which I'm sure like real banks hate this. Obviously.
Yeah, that's right. Real banks hate it. Yeah, because they can't mess around with depositor fund. So there are a lot of things that are very, depositor friendly, capital friendly, but in a very like forward-looking way for like crypto to come back.
That's interesting. That's an interesting combination. That's really cool.
It's amazing. I mean, you should come.
No, absolutely. I mean, in fact, a lot of the Urbit sort of company adjacent things. I mean, like Wyoming is kind of the spot. Wyoming and El Salvador are the two kind of go-to spots.
Only downside is that Federal Reserve and international bankers also hold meetings in Jackson Hole. So, but that's Northwest. So
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you. It's been enormously helpful, and I think it's going to be useful for everybody at home too to hear this kind of stuff. And so, why don't we wrap it up? And why don't you tell people like where they can learn a little more about Tacen?
Yeah, of course. So everybody can go to Tacen.com and learn more about what we do, what we build, and folks can also go to Tacen.exchange to trade digital assets. It's no sign up required. You just use your wallet, and that's it. There's no funny business going on.
Okay, and then in terms of you guys planning on doing a reassembly next year as well?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
So
even bigger.
Come on out to Wyoming and see it.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great seeing you. Boom.